cool. You made it. Great to see you again. So I'm back with a book. Yeah, I know. It was a bit strange to do something that was not a book, but that it was a special occasion. So anyway, I'm back with a book. So first to the housekeeping, because we want to be cool with that. And we've got our templates, which you totally should get because they're really cool. There's a whole load of them on the site. And then also the book, the creative writing book. So you should really check that out too, because it will make your writing totally groovy. So that's that. I am coming to you this week with a totally awesome writer, but I'm coming with a really unusual work. It's probably not the work most people would start with, because I'll explain. The book we're looking at this week is The Sadian Women by Angela Carter. Now, if you don't know who Angela Carter is is an English novelist. She died in the early 90s, I believe. But she is a major, cannot underestimate how major force in women's writing of sort of from the 60s into the 70s of that period is really important. She also wrote into the 80s, but especially that late 60s, 70s period, seriously important writer for that and for her way of writing, because she was iconoclastic. Her writing is surreal, is amazingly surreal, is gorgeous writing. I mean, if you just like the beauty of a sentence, if you want sentences that you could just drink up, Angela Carter, absolutely. They are just, is some of the most beautiful writing. But we're going to start with a book which I would say is very Angela Carter. Not because of its style, but because it's designed to get up the noses of people. That's Angela Carter. Most people, when they read Angela Carter, they start with something like The Magic Toy Shop, which is her first novel, super accessible, or they go and look at something like The Infernal Desire Machines of Dr. Hoffman. They might start right at the end with Wise Children. I actually started right at the end with Wise Children. But you do not fully appreciate what she's doing with her writing, and especially her early writing. Obviously, she hadn't articulated this because she hadn't articulated this to herself as a writer. But certainly after, especially if what you are coming to look at with her is her fairy tales, her adapted fairy tales really make a lot more sense. Or not so much sense, but understanding where they're coming from is much easier when you have a look at the Sadian Women. Sadian Women was published in 1979. It absolutely totally got up the noses of everybody. It is looking at, and this is going to make it sound like, oh gosh, why am I reading this book? It's actually look at the representations of women and women's sexuality in pornography. In particular, the writing of the Marquis de Sade. Now, I know her ladyship, I think her ladyship may have mentioned something about that she wasn't going there. I don't blame her. Oh, no, that was me. Yeah, that was me. I talked about that in terms of those notorious novels in terms of American Psycho. Yeah, that's right. That was me. I didn't think a ladyship would do that. Anyway, she takes as her frame of reference, as her her model, the characters of Justine, the virtuous woman, and Juliet, the licentious woman from Sard's works. And she looks at how these images really trap, hold, and do not allow women any kind of freedom. Now, the first really big thing is Angela Carter is not a prude. Angela Carter is not saying, is not anti-sex. In fact, she's incredibly pro-sex. When you look at her novels, you look at her fairy tales, you look at any of her novels, she is actually really pro-sex. What she is interested in is how women and women's sexuality is framed by the male gaze, which is why she's using this notorious writer of Sard, the most obscene, the most overt of male gazes, also a pretty shitty writer, to look at how women are framed. And so when you have Juliet in her monstrous man-eating guise, she is the terrorizing, she is the monstrous, terrifying female, but she's also only has her power because other people don't. She's the dominating and terrifying female. And you see this is the seductress, this is the dominatrix, this is all of those very powerful images, but they're still in service to the male gaze. They're there for men. They're not there for women. And it's the whore that's used to beat other women over the head with for not being enough. It's the excuse for misogyny because, well, we can't let you have that because you'll go off and you'll do this, and that frightens us, frankly. It's basically the slave owner's idea of what the slave will be if you give the slave freedom and their position. So Juliet is the role reversal of the master and slave power structure, which is really quite fascinating, but it talks very much of the fear of a dominant, that they will end up submissive. And so that's a really fascinating one. And it says basically, the way she's talking about it is, this is not a way to become the slave owner instead of the slave, is not the way to actually have a genuine sort of female sexuality. It's sort of a perverse nightmare fantasy of men still. The other alternative that is put forward, the Justine character, who I think is a lot more interesting in terms of what you can discuss with her. She is the good girl, the eternal virgin, no matter how many times she's raped. Because she never sees herself as sexual. This is the Madonna opposite to the whore. And Carter talks about the fact that, contemporary society is filled with these Justines, these women who are incredibly beautiful, incredibly desired, but who have to play ignorant of not only their sexuality, their beauty, their power over men. Carter talks very much about Marilyn Monroe, the dumb blonde archetype, that Marilyn Monroe's power over men came from the fact that she didn't behave, or she behaved as if she didn't understand what she did with men, to men. The skirt flying up, oh no, that's just an accident. I didn't know that would happen. Standing over the subway grate just as a train goes by, you know, like that. Who would have known that? I was just after a cool breeze from that's in the 7-Year Itch. It's sugar from Some Like It Hot, who Tony Curtis's character is completely bewitched by Sugar. Sugar has no idea that she is hot. She's smoking hot in that. But Tony Curtis's character is utterly besotted with her, and she's completely innocent of this mixture of innocence and sexuality. It's this perverse concept of like almost a child mind in an adult body. And I was actually, the other thing, that part of what made me think to do this book was I'd been watching the 4th season of The Crown, which of course has Diana, and I've always found Diana like an incredibly odd cultural icon. Of course, I grew up in the 1980s and the 1990s. I actually remember where I was when she died. I was in the car on the way down to a university open day when it came on the news radio. So there you go. That dates me, doesn't it? So Diana had that. She was the princess. She was incredibly beautiful. She never behaved in a way that allowed the audience to think that she was aware that she was incredibly beautiful or that she was manipulating the media. And so I find her a very odd figure. She is that innocent, and she's clearly not a virgin. She has 2 children at the very least. She's done it twice, you know, and believe the story, she did it a lot more times than that. But she projects that image. It's the wedding dress girl, the beautiful girl, the girl who has no idea how beautiful she is and needs a man to show her. It's a very, very, very flattering to men. You can desire her, this virginal creature, because she doesn't know how beautiful she is. So therefore she has no power over you. Because she doesn't know what she's doing, she can't be held responsible, so she is perpetually innocent of whatever happens to her. The whole thing is bizarre. It's a bizarre form of cognitive dissonance that has been used to frame female sexuality. And this is what Angela Carter is discussing, unpacking, and then proposing some sort of alternative, though that part of the book is probably the weaker part of the book, simply because while it is easy to unpack cultural norms, is much harder to put forward an alternative to these cultural forms. Though whatever deficits are in that part. Now, remembering this is written in 1970, this is published in 1979, so her attention is on heterosexual coupling, heterosexual women. It isn't talking to queer women. It isn't talking to queer men. It isn't talking to trans people. So it is a very mainstream view. But this is the 1970s. People were not, or feminists were not talking much outside of that really rigid heteronormative box. And partly because, you know, they were in such a position themselves. I think that you can look at 70s feminists and 70s feminism as putting your own gas mask on before you can help other people. You can't, if you're in trouble, you're not in a position to help other people yet. So there is a degree of 70s feminism looking very much at, these are the problems of heterosexual women in heterosexual relationships. And so we need to fix these urgently for ourselves, for our own sake. So I don't criticize her for being in a time and putting her, when it was necessary, and then putting her own oxygen mask on first. I mean, some people will. It does mean that the book has dated in terms of not talking about a variety more relationships. However, read as an artifact of its time, it is incredibly fascinating. And read to help you understand the rest of Carter's work, it is absolutely vital. Most people will skip this book, and I'm starting with it and centering it because I think everything else makes much more sense with it. She is very, very interested in female sexuality. Female sexuality permeates all her books. Even before she had thought this out with this novel, or with this long essay, really, it's a long non-fiction piece. In her novels, she was already discussing this. This is really a more of a formalization of the ideas that were already in her. So it's quite fascinating from that perspective. She is not like other feminists of the period who were very could be very prudish, who were very anti-pornography. She's actually very sex positive, which is again another word that she wouldn't really understand. She'd actually have a completely different way. She has another way of expressing this, but she's a very sex positive writer. She's not saying that women should not be having sex, should not be enjoying sex, should not be sexual beings. Adult women are sexual beings, but they should not be constrained by these framings that limit where they are in life. So, and what they can be and how they're seen. And because of that, I think she's an incredibly fascinating writer. We will be coming and having a look at more Carter as we go on. And stay cool, guys. And I'll see you again with my next video. Peace and love. Peace and love. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.